about we populate the unknown with our imaginations. So whatever it is that we're seeing in the dark tends to come from whatever it is that we're imagining is going to be there. Okay, so that's basic for us now. Yeah.
We reflect ourselves. We create the monsters inside the dark. Like when children see something in their closet or under their bed, it's basically themselves, but more monstrous in their pictures.
Yeah. You guys ever go to sleep listening to scary stuff? This is interesting. Last night I fell asleep. There's a radio show that comes on late at night called Coast to Coast AM. If you've ever heard of it before, it's been on for it's been on forever, man. It's been on for like 30-something years. They've had a few different hosts, and they talk about I guess paranormal things, strange things. But what's neat about the show is, so for example, if they're talking about like the possibility of aliens, they don't just bring on some guy who has a telescope and he lives in his mom's basement in Montana. They'll bring on somebody from like the head of some astrophysics project over at Caltech, and they'll talk about, or JPL, and they'll talk about like what NASA's doing with regards to aliens. So they don't just bring on like conspiracy theorist people, they bring on some credentialed people. And so they had a guy on last night who I guess performs exorcisms. So I fell asleep last night listening to a guy tell a story about exorcisms. And then at one point I woke up and I needed to use the restroom. And I couldn't, like, I was having trouble getting my legs to move. And I'm like, why won't my legs get up? And I was thinking, demons. Nah, they were just my cats. They're laying across my legs. So it's funny that that's an immediate thought that we can have. And so I knew they were my cats. I grabbed my phone and like flashed the light down there. I just saw my cats looking up at me with like those squinty eyes, like, it's not wake up time just yet. It's still night time. So we populate the darkness with the unknown. Yeah. So now we can say that we can forgive a child who's afraid of the dark. So why would we forgive a child, not an adult who's afraid of the dark? Yeah.
Because they're young, they haven't experienced the real world yet.
So there's a big part of that there. It's about experience. So they don't have anything yet that tells them otherwise. It doesn't tell them differently. How do you know that there's no monster under your bed? You check. Yeah, you check. And that takes courage to check. And then once we check, we kind of realize, there's nothing down there. When I was a little kid, my dad had a tool shed in the backyard, and he would tell me I was not allowed to go in the tool shed because there were machine monsters back there. And that's what he told me. What's a machine monster look like? I don't know. But it sounds pretty scary. So whatever I was, like 6-year-old me, 5-year-old me, whatever I was, I filled up a thing of water. I heard it was a bucket of water, but it must have been kind of small because that would have been very small. And my idea was I'm going to go out there and find the machine monsters, and I figured if they're machines and you throw water on them, it's going to kill them, right? So I just knew that if you dumped water on electronics, that would kill them. So I went around the side, around the back, completely convinced that there would be some machine monsters back there, and they were not there. And then I walked around the other side, and they were not there. And I ran in circles around it, could not find them. Opened up the tool shed, completely expecting to find one of them in there. No machine monsters whatsoever. So after that, I became convinced of something. My dad was a liar. No, I became convinced that there were no such thing as machine monsters. But it took going and checking for oneself before we would realize that. And so with children, it's about having courage, yes, but it's about experience. It's about being able to check and knowing something. So the darkness, what makes the darkness less frightening to us is going to be experience. So we can forgive children for being afraid because of their experience. But it's also an interesting thing, since we can easily forgive a child. It's not just that we can understand, we can sympathize, we can empathize. He's saying we can forgive a child. Okay, good enough. The real tragedy of life, though, and he refers to this as a tragedy, and that's when we're afraid of the light. So now, this takes on a separate meaning. Anybody look this guy up? I thought I'd ask anyway. Second period, someone looked him up, and they discovered something that they said, wow, everything makes sense now that I looked him up. Anything stand out to you about him when you're looking at him?
He's bald.
Gold.
He's bald. Why would he be bald? He doesn't seem like he should be old enough to be bald. And that's not just bald, that's like shaved down. That's like, took a razor to it. Who shaves their head like that?
People who work in the military.
People who what?
Work in the military.
People who are in the military? Not even that close. That's, what's that?
Monks.
Monks. Guess what he is?
A Buddhist.
He's a Buddhist. Yeah, he's a Buddhist monk. He wrote a book. This comes from a book of his I read. I read the book because this quote is oftentimes attributed to Plato. And I found out it was not Plato. And I thought, that's interesting. I want to find out who would write a book such that people would think it came from Plato. So I looked it up, and that's how I found his book, and that's when I read it. And the book, in short, is called something to the effect of The Monk and His Ferrari. Robin Sharma was an attorney, very, very, very successful attorney, actually, and he was only 25. He was exceptional at what he did. He was making over $1 million a year at 25 years old doing what he did. And he quit. And he gave away his Ferrari. And he gave away all this stuff because the thing that he had been pursuing, which was money and success, he had gotten it pretty early on, and he just felt empty. So he gave it all away. And it's a neat thing because we oftentimes will say things like, money can't buy you happiness. Yeah, there's only one way to be sure, though, which is to get a whole bunch of money. And then afterward, you can say, I'm not happy. But until we do that, a lot of times we remain convinced that does make us happy. But I'll tell you something that's going to be controversial, but it's absolutely true. Money is not the source of our problems. It's not the source of our problems. We're convinced that it is, because we're convinced that whatever the thing that we don't have is, that's the source of our problems. If we only had this, then all of life's problems would be solved. But wealthy people have problems too, and they're different problems. And we might think like, I'd rather have those problems. Yeah, until you have those problems. And then you long for a simpler life. For example, I'm thinking of a person I know who, I won't be too specific about her, but she's just a ghetto chick, man. I don't know another way of stating it. And there's not really a good reason for it, because she didn't grow up in a particularly, ghetto environment, but she just seems to have really embraced it. She's about 26, 27, something like that now. She got, I don't know how else to put it. She got baby daddies. She got a job where she's very excited about it because it's $17 an hour. And that's $2 above minimum wage. Although she's concerned because that means that they might cut down on her EBT benefits. So she's trying not to report the income because she's trying to hold on to that money. And the job that she's working, it's overnight. It's a graveyard shift thing. And she's interesting because she fashions herself as like a spiritually enlightened guru. She likes to repost people's things on Instagram and Facebook about enlightenment and spiritual awakening and all that. But her life is a complete mess. But it's been a complete mess for so long, she doesn't seem to realize how much of a mess it really is. Anyway, she's convinced that money is the problem. If she just had more money, all of her problems would be solved. This chick smokes a lot of weed, man, and she spends a lot of money on it. The problem in her life is not a lack of money. If she got a whole bunch of money, she would probably do very bad things with it and would end up broke again, if she even survived it. The problem is a lack of values. When you have the values, and then a weird thing's going to happen. All of a sudden, you're going to find out that you're conscientious, that you're frugal. In other words, you save, you invest well, you're wise with what you do have, rather than dwelling on what you don't have, and suddenly you're going to find that you're going to accumulate a bunch of stuff, money included. So the problem in her life is not a lack of money. The problem in her life is a lack of values, a lack of wisdom, knowing what to do with stuff. And so we can't get hung up on the things that we don't have. We have to focus on the things that we do have. And this is what Sharma was pointing out, that when you have a bunch of money, if you haven't developed values, it's almost worse, because you feel like, I should be happy. I have everything that people say that they want to have. I have those things, but I'm not happy. There must be something wrong, something wrong with me. As long as we don't have money, we can always say, if I just had that one thing, that's the one thing I'm lacking in. But if you have everything and you're still not happy, you realize at a deep existential level why that there's something, I guess, existentially wrong with you at that, So then it sends you off on a deep search for meaning. This is why I've said that suicide is a problem of I guess suicide is a disease of the young, very young, who don't have context, and then the wealthy as well. Because the wealthy, when they're miserable, so when we're young and we're miserable, we think we're always going to be like that. So there's a lack of context, a lack of reference points. When you're very wealthy and you're miserable, you feel like, I shouldn't be this miserable. I have everything. That means that there just must be something wrong with me. This is why these are the two groups who tend to commit suicide the most commonly. And so, when Sharma writes this book, he's seeking out to find out how it is that one can find meaning and purpose, of course, which we've talked a lot about. So anyway, so he's contrasting this dark that we can understand children don't have the experience, and then he contrasts it with this thing of light. And what does light represent? Yeah.
Truth.
Truth. Yeah, there's a word that we think of that's associated with that. It's got the word light in it. Yeah.
Enlightenment.
Enlightenment. Yeah. Enlightenment. And enlightenment is, it's to kind of be aware. It's like if you're in a room and it's completely dark, and all of a sudden the light comes on, now you see everything as it truly is. This is enlightenment. When you're enlightened, all of a sudden things occur to you in the world that never occurred to you before. All of a sudden you're like, everything is so clear to me now. And sometimes it has to do with, these are typically deep truths. Enlightenment wouldn't just be all of a sudden you're stopping and you go, holy crap, 2 + 2 = 4. It's a deep truth that you come across. Yeah.
How do you know that we experience enlightenment and or moments of clarity? How do you differ from that?
How do you realize it's enlightenment?
Or it's this moment of clarity?
That's a really hard question. Because like I was saying earlier, like the friend of mine I was talking about earlier, she's convinced that she's enlightened. And that means that she never will be enlightened. Because she doesn't know what she doesn't know. She thinks that she's already there. If you're going to, let's say I tell you, let's say I tell you, hey, you should go to Sacramento. And you're standing there and you go, I'm already in Sacramento. And you're like, no, you're not. You're showing them on a GPS, you're showing them on a map, you're in San Diego, and the person just refuses to see you, they refuse to hear you, and they're just like, man, I don't need your GPS, I don't need your maps to prove I know where I am. Well, that's a person who's never going to get to Sacramento. They're convinced that they're already there. If you already believe that you're enlightened, well then you're never going to seek enlightenment. It's something that you have to kind of constantly be testing. And so what it is to be enlightened, it's a tough thing to realize. But I think that there are certain things that you can, I think there are certain hallmarks that you're going to find of enlightened people. So for example, an enlightened person isn't going to cover their eyes and refuse to hear other things. If someone comes to you and wants to test your enlightenment, you're not a person who's going to close your eyes and shut your ears and just go, la, 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 I don't want to hear it. Because if you're truly enlightened, one of two things is going to happen. Either you really are, and so there's no danger in it, in sharing your views, or you're wrong about something, but because you want to be enlightened, you want to find out what you're wrong about. It's like I have a friend of mine used to one time said to me, you always want to be right. And I said, yeah, of course, who doesn't? But that doesn't mean I sit there and say, I'm right no matter what. It was that I'm willing to hear anything because I want to find out if I'm right. If I'm right, then there's no danger in hearing other perspectives, hearing other points of view. There's no point in listening to people. But if you're wrong, well then the danger is it upsets your entire view of yourself in the universe. Because you've constructed a psychological personality that allows you to exist in this universe that you find yourself. And as soon as someone comes along and changes something, it changes your view of yourself, and now you're unstable in a chaotic universe. That's why we defend our thoughts so much. That's why, if someone, for example, if you think that 2 + 2 = 4, and someone comes along and says it equals 5, are they wrong? Well, of course they're wrong. But you'll see how vehemently or how angrily people will defend their points of view. They don't just think somebody else is wrong. They think somebody else is stupid or evil, or we get so frustrated and angry with them. Why? They have a different perspective. And then we can test it. We can find out who's right and who's wrong. But we typically don't. We get angry with them. We should shut them down. It should occur to us, that's a strange thing. If I know I'm right, then why would I be so angry about hearing other points of view? Why would I avoid other points of view? And that's why, because underneath, unconsciously, we realize it's going to shift how it is that we see the world, how it is we see the universe. And of course, that means it unsettles us in how we see the world. So now we have some work to do to kind of reassemble the psychological characters so that we can continue to make sense of the world, the universe. And so I think that one of the key hallmarks, to answer your question from like 10 minutes ago, is that you'll know you're enlightened. Well, sorry, you'll have evidence that you're enlightened by that you're willing to test perspective, to hear other points of view. Also, if you're enlightened, it should be something life-changing. Like if you realize, oh my God, 2 + 2 = 4, and it doesn't do anything for your life, then it's probably not a point of enlightenment. And the whole idea of enlightenment is that like I said, you're in a dark room, all of a sudden someone turns on the light, and you can see things as they truly are. And of course, that's going to change how it is that you interact with the room. If you believe that there's nothing in the room, well, you can just run around in it, no big deal. But if the light comes on and you realize that there are knives all over the place, you're going to behave differently than you would have before the light was turned on. And we can see this. Have a little kid in the dark when they're trying to go to sleep, and they have trouble doing it. Turn the light on, for some reason they can sleep with the light on, but they can't sleep in the dark. That's because something's being revealed to them. So notice he points it out here as a tragedy that life. It's a tragedy of life when we're afraid of the light, because that means that we'll never attain this thing. We'll never see things as they truly are. We're going to live in a world that doesn't really exist, in a non-reality. Now, of course, if you ask a person, would you rather live in a reality or a non-reality? I think for many people it will depend on what that non-reality looks like. Yeah? But maybe for another time. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?